That is a song called Souls on Fire from the album Heavy Handed, and that is by a musician and singer, and his name is Stefan Hauk, and you're not going to believe it.
I can't. What would the odds be, Neil?
It's extraordinary. This happened last week. We played a song and the person who sang it was on it. Good morning to you, Stefan Hauk.
Good morning, lads. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, look, we wouldn't hear of not having you here. We are in part going to talk about the fact that you are coming to town this time next week, but we can't just talk about that for a minute and send you on your way packing. We need to know more. We need to know where it all started, what you're doing, all that kind of stuff. So, where did it all start?
Well, it started pretty early for me.
What, 7:15, or you mean some time ago?
Yeah, it actually did. We're currently on the road out of Sydney at the moment.
Oh, there you go.
It did start pretty early, but I started playing guitar when I was about 4 or 5 years old, because my dad plays a little bit, and I was always really enamored with it as a kid. So, yeah, I started pretty young, and by the time I was 11, I was kind of gigging in a local cover band with dudes in their 40s, so it was a bit of an education, to say the least.
So how do you get involved? Like, do you go up and say, "Excuse me, mister, can I play guitar in your band?" Or were you pretty good and known around the town?
Kind of family friends and stuff were involved with the band, so it was just I just kind of had an in there, and the original idea was for this first gig that I did was just that I'd play, maybe a few songs with them, and then I went to rehearsal, and a few weeks later I was playing all of the songs. So,
what sort of songs were they playing? Were they cover songs?
Yeah, so we played a lot of it was kind of classic rock stuff. So a lot of Bad Company and what else did we do? A bit of Led Zeppelin, all that kind of 70s rock kind of stuff was the kind of the vibe. And
so you started playing Bad Company, and here you are all these years later spending time with Bad Company on the radio.
Yeah, well, it's...
Now, Stefan, you mentioned your dad was quite a good guitar player. Was he one of your inspirations, or who else did you look up to? For
sure. I mean, my dad was definitely a big part of the reason I started playing, because he played a bit of guitar. He was predominantly a bass player. He still plays a little bit around town in Adelaide. But yeah, so him having a guitar around the house, and that was definitely a big factor in me being interested in him. And before I can even remember, I was drawing pictures of guitars, and it's just always been something that I've just been fascinated with, and it hasn't changed.
Grant, as a child, used to draw pictures of microphones and headphones. That was his thing. No, it wasn't. I made that up. So what is it about Adelaide and music? We've had this conversation about 50 times over the journey. You look at, Barnsey and Swanee and these guys. Graham Goebel comes out of Adelaide. Masters Apprentices came out of Adelaide. What is it about Adelaide?
Yeah, the Angels as well.
Yes, well, are we ever going to see your face again? And please don't go any further than that.
No, it's too early for that.
Yeah, absolutely. We had Matt Taylor had a crack at it last week, but that's another story for another time. What is it about Adelaide?
I think because I don't think it's hard to put a finger on it. I think maybe because it's a smaller city that it's not quite as competitive in terms of, having a lot of competition to play gigs. So I think a lot of people get opportunities to play pretty early on in their career. So it's kind of, I don't know, I've always found Adelaide to be a very supportive kind of music community. And I think that's a big part of it, is that, yeah, it's not super cliquey, or there's no real kind of, scenes you got to get on in. It's pretty welcoming. So I think that's a big part of it. I can't speak for what it was like in the 70s, because that's about 20 years before I was born.
Me too. Yes, or maybe not. Barnsey used to say, though, and they used to play down at the Largs Pier Hotel, that they'd get halfway through the first song, and if it wasn't going over well, they'd be on the floor having a fight with the people in the pub. So not quite as supportive maybe in those days, but I guess having live venues is a really important part of it.
Yeah, and it's which is in these times a bit concerning, because live venues kind of tend to be here today and gone tomorrow. which is a bit worrying at the moment anyway. But yeah, there's a decent amount still in Adelaide, given the size of the place. I mean, it's not a massive city, so we do okay. We've got enough to get by and have a scene at least. So yeah, it could be worse.
Now, Stefan, the music you predominantly play is the blues. What attracted you to that style of music?
I think it comes out of like the stuff my dad liked, which was the classic rock stuff. A lot of that has pretty kind of heavy links back to the blues. I mean, a lot of, like, if you listen to a lot of Led Zeppelin or Deep Purple or stuff like that, there's definite links back to the blues, and also Jimi Hendrix was a big kind of inspiration for me, and there's a lot of blues in what he did. So yeah, I think my interest in rock led me to Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix then led me to Stevie Ray Vaughan, and then Stevie Ray Vaughan led me back to guys like Albert King and you know, B.B. King, and you know, all of the Kings, Freddie King, you know, all of the great blues players, you know, the early kind of.
It was quite interesting, Stefan. Recently I was in Memphis. I'm a bit of an Elvis Presley fan.
A bit of an Elvis Presley fan, yeah.
And I got to find, you know, some of the history in the blues, particularly in Memphis and the surrounding areas, and it derives something from your soul, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it's one of those genres, like, in terms of musically what happens if you're just playing straight ahead blues, I mean, it's not a complicated music, but it's something, in order for people to really dig it, you have to feel it. And yeah, it's one of those things, you either kind of understand it or you don't. Like, people that don't understand it go, oh, it's a very basic form of music. It's like, yeah, but if you can really kind of access what it, you know, triggers, you know, inside of people, and, you know, if you can kind of play off that, you know, that's when it starts really getting special, because it's one of those things. It's easy to play, but hard to play authentically, if that makes sense.
Because I think if you look at some of the genre that we've been through in the past, you know, the stuff that Elvis Presley was doing very early doors in, you know, talking 50s, he had a lot of contemporaries. You would describe that as pretty simple. And you come to the late 60s and you had that lollipop or bubblegum or whatever they call it, bubblegum era, which was stupidly simple, and yet again attracted attention. So it's, as you say, it's not the simplicity so much as the interpretation, I guess, and hitting a button in somebody's soul.
Oh, definitely. I mean, you look at what you know, a big part of Elvis's success was the fact that he kind of bridged the gap between, you know, country music, gospel music, and blues music. You know, and the record labels were keen because they knew they had a demographic of white kids that wanted to access that kind of music, but obviously times were different back then, and they weren't as supportive of you know, black artists. So Elvis kind of popped up, and they're like, great, we've got a white guy who can do this kind of music, which is, you know, in hindsight is a bit of a shame, because I'm sure guys like Little Richard and, you know, Chuck Berry could have probably used a bit of extra promotion, but I think in the long run it had a positive effect, because it did lead a lot of people, you know, a lot of white kids especially, back to those kind of, you know, origin artists of rock and roll and blues. So yeah, it's a pretty massive effect that Elvis's kind of appearance.
And to this day, there is no radio show called For the Love of Little Richard or For the Love of Chuck Berry, but there is one hosted by the man across the table called For the Love of Elvis. It's on at 5 o'clock every Saturday afternoon on 94.7 The Pulse.
Oh, I'm sure it's got plenty of listeners too. I mean, I love Elvis. Elvis is probably my first kind of inspiration in terms of music. When I was 4 or 5, I was absolutely enamored with him, especially the early stuff.
I might get up and leave you two blokes to it.
Well, yeah, I know recently, Stefan, as I mentioned, I was on holidays and I was visiting a friend of mine in Vegas, and we played the original 45s, not just of Elvis at Sun, but a lot of the artists around then, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, and you could just see what Elvis was listening to inspire him were these artists that you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, you listen to Little Richard, and man, his vocal, the way he sang, was so ferocious, and it was like he was singing heavy rock 20 years before heavy rock existed. You know, the tone of his voice and the growl and just everything in what Little Richard was doing was so aggressive and so rock. It was really ahead of its time. But interesting, isn't it? Well, so what era of Elvis are you into? Do you like the whole gamut, or the early stuff, or what's your vibe?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a fan of everything, but those early songs, and when I was hearing some of those tracks from the original 45s, the way that they were originally heard, not on my music file as they are now, those have got an amazing feel to it, you know, and I can imagine what that would have been like in the 50s to inspire people then and now to perform that type of music.
Yeah, I mean, and it was pretty archaic, like the way they recorded those early Sun recordings. Did you go to Sun?
I certainly did, and it's a privilege to be in there each and every time, because you're talking about not just Elvis, but Johnny Cash, Carl Perkins, Roy Orbison went through there, and as late as U2 in the 80s recorded there. It's a very special room, and they still can do recording. So maybe one day, Stefan, you must go over there and record something. It'd be awesome.
I would absolutely love to. I mean, the first single I had on cassette was That's All Right, with the B-side of Blue Moon of Kentucky.
I like Stefan a lot, by the way.
Yeah.
If you ever noticed it.
Yes, we're going to have a new show on the radio called For the Love of Stefan.
Well, Stefan's talk. I was just reading here about you've got 2 albums out, Stefan.
I do, yeah. So I released my first album back in 2017, Long Road. That was, I was probably 21 or 22 then. I decided it was about time that I put something together, and, you know, it's funny, you end up kind of looking at, do I go to this studio, that studio, do I have this producer, and then I went, you know what, I'm just going to try and do it myself. So I did. I learnt how to record and mix a little bit. You know, I'm still learning today, but it was definitely a great process, you know, to basically tell myself, all right, this is at the start of the album, I basically said, well, I'm booking a show in 5 months to launch this album, and I'm going to have to write and record one between now and, you know, a couple of months before then, because it takes a little while to get all the CDs manufactured and all of the distribution and stuff. So I set myself that challenge at the beginning of making that album, and what do you know, I managed to pull it off and not miss the album launch date. So.
And you write all your own material?
Yeah, wrote all my own stuff. I've been writing songs for quite a while. I started writing probably, 9 or 10 years old, I think, was when I started kind of writing a few, nothing good. It's all terrible, but, you know, it's all part of the learning process, I guess.
Well, Paul McCartney did a series of concerts called Unplugged. Remember when MTV were doing that series?
Yep. And
he actually played the first song he ever wrote. So when you get onto MTV Unplugged, you might need to dig out 1 or 2 of those.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a massive Paul McCartney fan.
Now we're talking.
He's probably if I was to pick one person to be my all-time hero, I think it's probably McCartney.
Have you seen him live?
I did. I saw him last year in October.
Yes,
I think.
Yes, I was there, not probably at the same concert because you were in Adelaide and I was in Melbourne, but I also saw him 5 years earlier, and for a man who's 82, that's older than Rob, who is our normal co-host, and that's really saying something. So one thing that fascinates me about the blues is if someone said to me, jazz, I'd go New Orleans, right? If someone says, blues, you tend to think Southern America as well. If you think, I'll call it, general rock and roll, England, really good. America, really good. Australia holds its own there. But there doesn't seem to be much in the way of Australian blues that's been commercially successful. You think of some of Billy Thorpe's stuff. You think of Matt Taylor from Chain that we had on last week. What is it about the Australian audience that doesn't quite warm to blues like other parts of the world?
I don't know whether it's necessarily the audience that doesn't warm to it. I don't know. I think it's more to do with the way the industry historically was kind of very pop focused and very rock focused. I've from what I can see, I've found that audiences respond really well to blues music, and yeah, I can't speak of times before me, because that was, it was a completely different industry back then. But I know that the focus was much more on singles, especially in Australia.
And 3-minute singles.
Yeah, which blues doesn't really lend itself to.
Mm.
Whereas I feel like the markets in Europe, America and the UK, I feel like they were much more album-focused markets, where people could, where album sales were really more of a factor. Well, I mean, big singles were still important, but I feel like there was more of an accepted notion of, you buy an album and listen to the whole album kind of thing. And I think they were marketed that way. There was a lot of bands that were really successful in the UK and the US that didn't really have any hit singles.
Mm. I guess the other thing too, that, if you were an up-and-coming pop singer, I'll use that expression, or heaven forbid, hip-hop or rap, the kind of music that's only missing the letter C off the front of it, there are outlets on the radio that warmly embrace that kind of music. And, you look at the Taylor Swift phenomenon, you would describe her as sort of country pop, that kind of stuff. You would be quite surprised to turn on commercial radio and hear the blues. How does a blues musician gain commercial acceptance, given that, the mainstream radio stations don't seem to want to play it?
Yeah, I don't know if it's. I think internationally, if you can captivate people with your songwriting, and I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm a typical straight ahead blues artist. Like I write a fairly broad range of stuff. I think because my guitar playing is always quite bluesy, that's kind of the common thread.
Yeah.
But because I'm not just, there's plenty of blues artists that release, an album that's just 12-bar blues, straight ahead kind of stuff. But I'm not really focused on doing that, because I feel like that's been done. I'm not going to do a 12-bar blues album that's going to be as good as Albert King did. So I'll kind of do my thing, which is more of a blend of bringing in a bit of soul, a bit of country, a bit of, some other stuff, a bit of pop sensibility too. I mean, you look at what artists like John Mayer, Chris Stapleton, have had, you look at the success they've had, Marcus King, in the last kind of 20 years, and because they have really, because they're good singers and have good songs, they've kind of transcended just being kind of atypical to one genre. I mean, Chris Stapleton's a great example, because he writes country music, but he has a really soulful voice, and he's a kind of rocky, bluesy guitar player. So it's a really cool fusion that ends up, appealing to a pretty wide range of people, and I dig that, because I when I listen to music, I want to hear a bit of a new combination of sounds, because if I want to listen to traditional blues or traditional country, I'll listen to where it came from. But I think the beauty now in music is hearing stuff that's a new combination of things that we've heard before.
Well, Stefan, there'll be people now throwing things at the radio saying, where can I get this music from? I'm assuming you're on the streaming services, but importantly, next Saturday night at 9:30, I think, so that counts me out because I'm well and truly asleep by then, but you will be at Pistol Pete's in Little Mallet Street. Sadly, one of those blues venues that comes and goes because it's closing in late June. But, yeah, you'll be there.
I will be there. I'm really looking forward to it too, because it's a cool, intimate little venue that, doesn't take that many people for it to feel like a real kind of vibe in there. It's such a cool place. They do really good food, and it's just, Yeah, it's a shame that venue is not going to be around anymore. I mean, the pressures of the industry are growing by the day, and it is really a shame that another great venue that supports live music is kind of giving in to those pressures. But it's just a reminder that to all of us to make sure that we support our venues as much as we can and go and see live music and go and order a meal when we can afford to do it. I know it's hard. Cost of living is tough for everybody, but whenever we can, we've got to try and support our local businesses because they've been through the ringer the last few years, goes without saying. So,
Yep.
Yeah, it is such a shame, but I'm going to try and
go out with a bang.
Yeah, positive out of it and really, give it the best send-off from my point of view and play the best show I possibly can.
Well, we've got a number of listeners in a number of other places, and Grant's just going to quickly tell us where you're going to be over the next week or two.
Well, there's Lake Tyers Beach in Victoria, which is on tomorrow, I think. Then, of course, in Geelong next week. Campbellfield also on the 23rd of May, and then heading down to Tasmania. So check out Stefan Hauk's website, and you can see where he's playing.
Now, Hauk is Hauk, folks. So Stefan, Stefan.
I just noticed here he's got a gig in Italy.
Oh, have you?
Yes, I do, actually.
Oh, well, to those who are listening in Italy, he is coming to you. So, yes, that would be grouse. If you're in Italy, you could pick up some music with Stefan. But, Stefan, thank you so much for being part of the show this morning. We are concerned that you were referred to us by Andrew Buse. How do you know Busey?
I actually didn't know Busey. I met him through another mutual friend of ours, Craig. So
you do follow a football team, I'm assuming, coming from Adelaide?
Yes, I'm a Crows man.
You know that Busey played about 280 games for Geelong and the Brisbane Bears and the Brisbane Lions?
I am aware of that. Yes.
And if you're not, just ask Busey, he'll tell you. Good morning, Andrew, if you're having a listen. Thanks for being part of the show, and we'll maybe get to see you in Saturday night.
Oh, it'd be great to see you guys. Let me know if you're coming down.
Will do. Thanks, Stefan.